I think we're just going to give it a couple more minutes here, or just a minute or so here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ann Zeta, and I am the Executive Director of Community Design Fort Worth, and I appreciate all of you participating today in our design talk. I'll just give it 30 seconds or so more, and if anybody is joining, Mackenzie can let them in, but they'll miss my brief introduction. I don't want to take up too much of our time, but I just wanted to start by briefly introducing Krista Nightengale, who is the Executive Director of Better Block Foundation, and she's been working with communities to turn parking lots into plazas to slow streets for the past 6 years. These are all things that I am passionate about. So when I started watching what she was doing with Better Block, I thought that it would be a perfect design talk to have for our kickoff after I became the Executive Director of Community Design Fort Worth. This is a collaboration between Community Design Fort Worth and AIA, so I want to mention that as well. We work together on these design talks. And my reasoning for wanting to do this talk was that many of the things that Better Block does aligns with my beliefs and my experiences with community engagement and the desires of Community Design Fort Worth to bring those tools to a broader audience and to the entire community so that they can participate in some of these community engagement activities. I want to express my appreciation to everyone for supporting Community Design Fort Worth, and also ask that you support Better Block because they are also a nonprofit. And so if you'll check out the work that they're doing and consider supporting them as well, we appreciate them doing this talk for us and bringing these tools to the broader community in Fort Worth and beyond. I see a few people from out of state even. So with that, I will hand it over to Krista and she can start her talk. We're going to be watching the chat for any questions that people submit in writing. And if we're a small enough group, we may have some time at the end to allow folks to unmute and ask some questions themselves. So with that, I will hand it over to Krista.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning and talking about the Better Block community organizing and everything and all around that. So I will dive right in. So the Better Block is an urban design nonprofit, and we are based out of Dallas, Texas, but we do work all over the country. Our work started about 11 years ago when our founding director, Jason Roberts, walked out onto this street, which is here in Oak Cliff. And he and his neighbors said, what can we do to make the street better? They wanted to add cafe seating. They wanted to add flowers. And basically, they just wanted to create a space where people could come together. But they quickly learned that there were ordinances prohibiting these things from happening. So it was $1,000 to add sidewalk flowers. It was area times market value times 85% times 12% to add street cafes. And there was an ordinance that said it was illegal for people to gather on a sidewalk. So if you want to kill street life, this is what you do. So Jason and his neighbors took a look at this, and they just didn't know exactly what to do. But they had heard of this idea of tactical urbanism, which is just the concept of the community going out and making the changes that they wanted to see. So that's exactly what they did. For one weekend, they kind of just took over their street and made some changes. So they incorporated a bike lane with kids paint and duct tape, knowing they could remove it quickly if they had to. They rented some old street lighting. They put out some seating. They talked to their neighbors in the area and they said, hey, I know you have some ideas for a business. We have some empty storefronts. Do you want to pop up for a weekend and just see what happens? During all of this, they printed out those ordinances that they were breaking and they posted them in the windows, and they invited city staff to come along. And they said, listen, we can't have all of this because we have these in place. And city staff said, you're right. Some of this just doesn't make sense. And over time, they worked to change some of those fees and adjust some of those ordinances. So Jason and his neighbors realized that there was a great deal of power in the community going out and kind of affecting some of these changes. So they open sourced a lot of their ideas as they continued to do some local projects in the area. And because it was open source, that allowed it to spread around the country and around the world. So we are now in this old car garage in Oak Cliff for at least 2 more months. We're actually going to be moving a little bit further south, but this space has served us so well. It is basically 1 part office space and 2 parts workshop. And this is where we work with folks young and young at heart. And we show them that they have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to make the changes that they want to see. In most cases, we're simply there to give permission. One of the tools that we use in this work is digital fabrication. Sorry, I'm going to skip along. Okay, so we have an online library of street furniture designs called Wikiblock. These designs are free for anyone, anywhere to download. You cut them out using a CNC router, which is like a giant printer for wood. And then you can build these elements without any glue, screws, or nails. So community members can take these elements and put them out on the street and make the street instantly better or activate a sidewalk instantly. And we're really excited because next week we will be launching an extension of this furniture line with AARP Texas, and the furniture will be geared for folks 50 and above. So look for more on that by the end of next week. But we've used this to work with a lot of different neighborhoods and make some changes. And then we've also used it in some weird ways. A few years ago, before South by Southwest, the Wisconsin Cheese Board reached out to us and said they were doing an installation at South by, and they wanted to host the world's largest cheese board, but they wanted it to be in a barn. That it had to be set up within 8 hours, and it had to be in this kind of oddly shaped conference room. So they asked if this was something we could do. We had some downtime. We said, we're not sure, but we'll give it a go. This was kind of the design. This was us the night before, hoping we could actually hold thousands of pounds of cheese. And then this is kind of what it turned into. And it is a Guinness World Record holder. I actually haven't checked that this year, but I'm pretty sure we're still the world record holder on this one. We also do things like geodesic domes with stages, just because, we can and we want to test it out. So we also use the tools for more practical uses, such as working with neighbors to kind of rethink their public spaces. This is a project that we did in Duluth, Minnesota in a November month. So it was very cold. And the challenge was, how do we take something like this lot that's really cold and gray and uninviting and turn it into a space like this that's has the community there and it's warm and it's a space that you want to be even if it's freezing outside. In this, you can kind of see we used our CNC router to kind of rethink what a train station stop looks like. On the inside here, we have vendors serving. And then on the other side, we have seating for rideshare or public transit or people just kind of waiting. And then, of course, you can see the community here with their food trucks and activity. We also work in places like West Allis, Wisconsin. And a lot of times we're looking at streets and how can we help the streets better serve the communities rather than the pass-through motorists. So this was one particular instance where we had some small businesses in this area. We had a city-owned lot over here to the right, but a lot of high-speed traffic, not a lot of people stopping to frequent these businesses. And so this was kind of the approach. Kind of adding in these bump outs so that we lessen the amount of distance that the community members had to walk across, incorporating bike lanes to kind of obviously create space for the bicyclists, but also create some friction so the cars could slow down. And then we took that city-owned lot and we talked about putting in a natural playscape for the kids there. And then again, playing with digital fabrication and dimensional lumber and kind of creating this gateway piece. I believe this was a project that we did in 2019 that this lot has been completely transformed since then and does have a kids playground in the area. We've also done a lot of work in Akron, Ohio. In this particular project, this was a result of our first Better Block in the area, where we realized that there were a lot of houses in the neighborhood that we were working in, but most of them are run down and vacant. We purchased one of the houses through a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We transformed the bottom to be kind of a welcome center and gathering space for mainly the Bhutanese refugee population that lives there in the neighborhood. We renovated the rooms on the second floor so we could rent them out and help us offset some of the costs of the operations with the offices for the staff on the third floor. And then the back parking lot, we turned into a park, which is now called the People's Park, and just a space for people again to gather and kind of be there. This is a more permanent take on a Better Block. We hired folks locally We worked alongside them for the first 3 years, kind of defining the space, defining the concept, and then we handed the keys over to them, and they have continued to run with it well beyond us, which is our ultimate goal, is to not be involved and not be needed. We also have worked in Toronto, where we created Canada's first ever Vision Zero project. So in this particular approach, what we were looking at was reclaiming some space for pedestrians and bicyclists and ultimately slowing down the traffic along here. So this one was actually quite tricky, and we had to get creative in our permitting in order to be allowed to do it. A lot of cities are familiar with doing block parties, which is where you're shutting down the traffic and you're throwing a party in the middle of the street. In our projects, 9 times out of 10, we're going to keep the traffic flowing, because we want to show that by redesigning a space, you can actually make it serve the pedestrians and the bicyclists and the shop owners better, but you can still allow for that traffic to be there. So in this particular case, what we did is extended the sidewalk space here, added some parklets, added in a bike lane with a bit of a buffer with some planters, created a mural. We had to call this a mural. We couldn't call it a crosswalk, and then repeated on the other side. What we found was that people overall were pretty open to the idea of the bike lanes here in this area. Some of the business owners were upset because we took away parking. And throughout the weekend, we continued to talk with them about ideas and plans. And what we did at the end was said, okay, we hear you. What we will recommend to the council member is doing the bike lane here and doing parking to make it a parking protected bike lane, and then repeating on the other side. So you've got your parking, you've got your bike lane, and you still have these really great sidewalks. And that was officially installed permanently last year. So it was a good example of how you can go from temporary to permanent through piloting and kind of demonstrating what a space could be. Part of our process, which is 120 days, is really working alongside folks throughout the whole thing. And we do surveys at the beginning, but that's just one step of the community engagement that we're doing. We really say that the entire thing is community engagement, because if we don't get to you through the surveys, you may become part of the process through the planning of the actual demonstration event, or through the fabrication of the materials, or you may be an artist or a vendor who kind of comes in that way. If we don't get you there, then while we're on site actually installing everything and painting in the street, you may be driving by and you may stop and say, what is going on? And we may get you there. If we still haven't gotten to you, we may get you at the 2-day demonstration that we do, which is really just a fun party. But it's our trick to get you there to test out this new space and some of these new concepts, and to give your feed time in real life about what's going on. So a project that we've done a little closer to home is in the Vickery Meadow area here in Dallas. If you've been here in this area, you might know this 5-point intersection, which is really quite wretched. But there are a lot of students who walk to Sam Tasley Middle School up here in the left-hand corner, and they're kind of walking through this area to the apartments and to their homes over here on the right. This project was in 2019. This area was experiencing high crime, and really the focus of this project was on reducing crime and how could public spaces start to affect that. This is what we turned this project into. This is one that was a little more semi-permanent. So it wasn't just our 2-day demonstration. It was to be up for a year. What we did is we took away this right-hand turn and this right-hand turn, so that students, when they're walking across the street, only had to worry about this section and this section, rather than this section and this section, or this section, this section, and this section. So we took those 2 right-hand turns away. We did this in 2019 temporarily. They are still taken away to this day, and no one's ever brought anything up. So I hope that's a permanent thing. We worked with the small businesses over here. They all had bars in their windows, and we worked with them to remove those bars and to open up the windows to kind of open up permeability into the businesses, as well as out into the plaza. And of course, we added a whole bunch of color through paint, and we created a plaza space here that could be activated should the community want, or just a passive space if that's what they wanted. We use this shipping container to house a lot of the elements that you could bring out. And we basically just gave the key code out to the community and said, if you want to pop up or do something, just go for it. And then whenever they put everything back inside, they still had a whole bunch of seating and planters and different things like that in the space if they wanted it. So this was in November of 2019. We had all these plans for a year, all this programming we were going to do, everything. And of course, we all know that then COVID hit. And so this space took on a different life than we ever anticipated. And really, it just became a space where people could be outside and be safe and still maintain their safe social distances. Since this was installed, we have not had a single violent crime incident happening in the plaza. And crime in the area in general has also reduced since then. Last year, we worked on a project in South Dallas called the MLK Food Park. This was a project that was sponsored by the Real Estate Council. And originally we thought we were going to do a street project, but COVID happened, and we realized that there were a lot of small vendors, especially food vendors, who lost a lot of income because the fair didn't happen and various outdoor events weren't happening. We did surveys of the community to kind of see what it is that they would like to see here in this area. And, they talked a lot about healthy dining options, sit down options, green space. Those were some big things. And they wanted art and activities and different elements like those. So we decided to do a food park here in this area. We started going through the planning of it and put together our rendering, put together our thoughts. We were actually told by several people that people would not come to South Dallas for a food park. Like, it just was not going to work out. And we said, all right, well, it's a pilot demonstration. Let's go ahead and give it a try and just see what might happen. And the park was up for 30 days, but the food portion of it was there and activated for 8 days. We had more than 5,500 people coming through. And it proved that people, not only would people come to South Dallas, but they wanted food parks, and they wanted this idea and the space where they could come and they could try out some of these different things. What happened because of this is we started to work really closely with food vendors, and especially those who had trailers or things beyond food trucks. And we realized just how outdated so many of our food ordinances were. The definition didn't really allow for food trailers, and it was kind of wonky. Shipping containers were definitely not allowed. We found that you could not serve fresh fish or poultry. It had to go directly from fried to frozen because of health reasons, but that also affects people's health. And we learned that people had to return to a commissary every single night. These commissaries are generally in North Dallas. So if you're a food operator in South Dallas, you're spending a good portion of your time driving to and from a commissary every single day. So we started looking at some of those policies and we said, this just doesn't make sense. Put together a task force. I would like to say it sounds as easy as I'm making it right now, but it really took us an entire year. And we finally got the ordinances passed this week on Wednesday. So some of those fees, we discussed fees as well, because those have been outrageous. The fees are changing. You can now serve fresh fish and poultry. You can return to a commissary once a week instead of daily, and trailers are given an annual permit. And we also have shipping containers that are now allowed as part of mobile food vending here in Dallas. So another example of how you can go from a pilot demonstration and some of the more permanent impacts that can have. We have a partnership with Microsoft and have done a few projects with them over the past year or so. One of our first ones was in Quincy, Washington. So this area, it's a town, I think they've got about 7,500 people here. And they are mainly, they have a lot of apple orchards. So their streets are all about this wide, which is quite intense. So a little bit of parking, but 2 lanes and very fast streets. They had some businesses along here that were really amazing and already thinking about doing parklets and trying to find ways to kind of bring people to their part of town and, open up some opportunities. So on this one, we did a take on La Rambla and took over the center of the street and created kind of a market vending space. The idea, again, was that you could leave the streets open to traffic. We left 11-foot drive lanes on either side. However, people were a little uncomfortable with that. They just wanted the street shut down. So this is one of the, I said 9 times out of 10, this was the 10th one where we did shut down the street. But we used digital fabrication. The student at the high school in the area had a CNC router, so they cut out all these pieces. And then you can kind of see some of the tree planters and the light poles. We used the apple bin boxes for those, and we created a stage with the apple bin boxes as well. And this just kind of shows you how quickly the actual installation is. Our whole process is 120 days. This happens on day, 116 through 120, where you're bringing everything together. The community's painting in the street together, and then they bring the heart and soul with all the food, the art, the entertainment as part of the actual demonstration. We also have a concept called our Better Block in a Box, which is basically a shipping container that you rethink its use, cut windows in it. So it could be a kiosk, but we also put all these different elements inside it, and then it can be shipped around to different places. So you can have a placemaking event with everything that's inside the box. It takes about 2 hours to set everything up. You have your event, and then you can take it all down and ship it away again. And each one's a little bit different, just kind of depending on the uses and what people would like to see with it. We have a few locally here. Trust for Public Land has one. McKinney, the city of McKinney has a box. And we are actually working with the city of Garland on putting together a box for them. And then this was one that we did last year, which is, again, looking at crime and how can public spaces affect crime. So this is just a shopping center at the Forest Adelia intersection. There are some apartments in the area that do have some issues with crime. We heard a lot from the neighbors that they didn't have any public spaces. They also have curfews in their apartments. They had to be in by 10. And so there was no reason for them to meet one another or really look out for one another. So this was the concept that we put forth, literally just trying to turn a small, I think it was like 40 parking spots into a park, and kind of seeing what that could do with the community. And this is what it ended up turning into. We had a basketball area that was hugely important to the community. We had a kind of a flex green space area, a little storage over here with a container, and then a kids play area over here. And what was really interesting about this installation, we had someone come out at one point and he said, my friends and I are taking bets on how long it'll be till someone gets shot in this park. And we're like, okay, all right, we hear you. But we're going to see what happens. And this is what happened. The community came out, people came out, and the neighbors told us this is the first time that we've really got to meet each other. This gave us a reason to meet one another and to just be in the space. As you can see, this is a super temporary basketball goal. The city actually did purchase this area and is going to eventually, maybe at some point, turn it into a park. So the goal here was to get feedback. What do people want to see and what works and what doesn't work? And hopefully erase some of the fears. The basketball court it's a big thing. We saw all the positives from the basketball court. And yet when I told some folks that, hey, we need to make this permanent, I was told, well, there are statistics around basketball courts. And I was like, sure, but look at what's happening. Like, look behind you and see what's happening on this court. Like, that's not happening here. So let's work on making these a little more permanent in this space. And they did install 2 permanent basketball courts, I think 3 weeks ago. So excited to see some of that coming up. So you can see just kind of some general stats about the project. We had about 3,100 people coming through. We had more than 40 programming partners, because you can design a beautiful space. You can put all the bells and whistles on it. If you don't have programming, it's not going to work. So we have amazing partners who kind of come together to make it happen. We do on-site surveys to see what works and what doesn't, and what people would like to see a little more permanently. And then we also gathered some stats on some of the crime and what happened there. Before the project, when we asked people, did you feel safe? We only had 24.4% saying I feel safe in this area. During the project, we had 97.1% people saying that they felt safe in the area. Again, it's just because it was activated, and it's because people were able to be together with their neighbors. So I don't want to talk too terribly long, but I just kind of want to high level wrap up, five of the reasons that we do what we do. There's a million reasons, but these are some of our top five. The first one is for change. As I mentioned, we do pilot demonstrations and we build them rapidly. But for a lot of funders, that's hard to wrap their minds around why they would give to do something when we don't know what we're doing and we don't know what the impact is going to be. But we do see a lot of long-term changes from the work that we're doing. Positive perception changes is a big part of it. We do see an increase in street life. We see newly formed partnerships. Community engagement is a huge part of the work that we do and a lot of the reasons why we do what we do. We do see street and infrastructure changes after a project, and we see a lot of programming continue after our projects as well. Obviously, we do so much of what we do for the community. So we love getting to work alongside neighbors and kind of bring to life some of their dreams and some of their ideas. Sometimes we're challenging some things as well. Everyone wants more parking. And so we have to kind of showcase what that means. We actually have shirts that say it's hard to find parking in great places, meaning that the places we love to go were designed and built for us, not our vehicles. And so when you start to flip that and you start to build more for the cars, then they are no longer the great places we love to go to. So we work really closely with the community, kind of in some places, educating around some of these concepts and just, kind of bringing some of their ideas to life as well. We also work to build for discovery. So this is actually an illustration of a project that we did somewhat recently. I handed the illustrator 9 pages of notes of what it took for me to get a permit for one particular project. And this is what it looked like. And I won't lie to you, this was probably one of the more frustrating projects I've ever worked on because it just didn't make sense. And I shared this with the vice mayor halfway through the process. And I said, ultimately, you've got a culture of no, that's happening here. You have permitting fees, you've got barriers left and right. If I were not paid to do this, I probably would have given up about, a month ago. So something's got to change. And because we are outsiders in a lot of the work that we do, we are coming into neighborhoods. Because we are outsiders, we can say things that the community can't. We don't have to worry about the ramifications in the way that community members do. And sadly, people tend to listen to us a bit more because we are outsiders. And so we have seen some permanent changes from this project and a real hard look by the city at their permitting process and understanding the ways in which they need to change some of these things up. So we're still working through this process and trying to advise on how to make it a little bit easier. But that, part of this is discovering some of the barriers that are put in place and helping to identify solutions to bring them down so that ultimately we're not needed to do a project. Oops. And we always tell people that sometimes we build for Instagram. We believe that people they deserve to live in the places that they want to show off and the places that they're proud of. And so we want to build moments and have concepts by artists and just bring pieces into the space that they can show off and be proud of and invite their friends to come to as well. And ultimately, we are building for love, not for fear. And we build for the communities who are there and not all the what ifs that we as humans are so amazing at coming up with. This one's a tricky one. And I have to keep coming back to it quite often because, so often when we get into the middle of a project, we're asked, well, what if the homeless destroy it? That is always a question. Or we're working on a project right now in Dublin, Ireland, where the concern is around teenagers and antisocial behavior. So there's always something that people are afraid of. And if you constantly build for those what ifs, you're going to create something that just ultimately won't work. So we always try to encourage building to include rather than exclude. And that is what we do here at the Better Block. So I promised Anne I would leave plenty of time for some Q&A and for discussion. And so I would love to hear your all's thoughts and hear what questions you have and go from there.
Well, in looking at the chat, I see one person who typed in a question, and that is, how can we bring this to East Fort Worth? I know you all are in Dallas, but I know that you work all over the world. So I'm sure that there is an opportunity to bring this anywhere somebody would like to bring it. But if you would like to address that question first.
Yeah. So we are up for working pretty much anywhere. But we're kind of a weird nonprofit. We're mainly fee for service. And so what we do is we have a budget that we set forth that kind of outlines all the details and all the different things. And if we can find either a grant to cover it or, find someone who can cover that cost, then we can do the project. So that's kind of where it starts. One thing I didn't mention is, we do a survey process. We will not do a survey process. We won't begin any of it until we do have funds, because so often the communities we work with are over surveyed and under delivered on. So if I'm going to ask questions of the community, I want to ensure that I can actually bring to life some of what they're reflecting back. So I know it's not the best answer, but that's what it is.
Well, I think also just this, you have open sourcing. So a lot of the stuff
that you do,
completely available to communities. So if a community wanted to get together and do some aspect of this themselves, they can gather that information from your website and, other places. And there are some organizations in Fort Worth as well that are doing this kind of collaboration with neighborhoods and with communities. So we're happy as Community Design Fort Worth to put people in touch with those groups as well. The next question is there a typical budget range for your projects?
Yeah. So before plywood costs so much now. So we do a lot with our digital fabrication and we use plywood for that. So costs now are just crazy, but they probably around 70,000 upward, depending on how permanent you want something to stay. So like if we're building, I think that Forest Adelia Park that we did, that lasted for a month, though some of that stuff is still in place several months later. I think that budget was like 140, 145 or so. So it kind of depends on the approach, but generally that's where it starts.
And I think we have seen in Fort Worth some better block type projects that have been done that then the city embraced and brought funding from bonds or the yearly budget that the city has, where they have installed permanent infrastructure that reflected what was demonstrated in the temporary installation of a better block type of thing. So these dollars are not just dollars that go into it and are there for a short period of time and then disappear. They definitely go on. Who can we contact for more information on Wikiblock templates, build issues, customization, etc.?
Yeah, you can send me an email. Start with me. It's just krista@betterblock.org, and I can leave it here too. And I will connect you with our architectural designer and Draven, and we can answer your questions that way.
And she has put her email in the chat, so you can pick that up right there as well. Well, there's no other written questions, but if anybody has a question they just want to ask verbally, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Since we're such a small, intimate group here, I don't think that'll be a problem.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Debbie?
Krista, this is absolutely wonderful, all the things that you've done and around the country. I actually heard about Better Block in 2011 when it started, and we did 2 on Ray Street. It's not the east side that I learned, but it is Riverside. And so we did it in 2012 and 2014, and several years later, maybe 5 years later, we ended up with an $8 million streetscape. So we've had a lot of change. Now we're ready to move on a little further because we never had, we have not developed the organization we need to make this sustainable, but we have an opportunity where we might be able to do it. And yes, love to use your templates. I had contacted Jason at the time, but I know everything was new. And so I never heard from him, but I put us on the map. I did a lot of things. So I'm so glad to see what you're doing and that you're there. So I'm thinking that as we move forward, and I'm getting ready to write an application for hopefully a grant or a project that we could have on Ray Street to continue. What's been happening is that maybe we could partner
Mhm.
some way with you. Was that possible?
Oh, yeah.
Use your expertise, because we actually already have used your expertise, and we
Yeah.
thank you because it's been very successful. But if we could go further with it and partner with you and do some of the other things you're doing. I mean, I love what you did in Akron. Where, I mean, if we do get this grant, we would have to have an office, which we don't have. And I love
Mhm.
that you bought a house and,
Mhm.
and you turned it into a community place for people. And
Yeah.
that's really our goal too. So I would like to
Yeah.
contact you at some time if that's okay.
Yes, and I send me an email. I promise I will respond.
Sure.
Don't be offended that Jason didn't respond.
I'm not.
Okay. I had to bug him to get him to respond to things too, so it happens. But
Okay,
I
okay.
promise I can respond. And yeah, let's sit down and let's just chat and brainstorm and see what all we can make happen. Would love to work with you.
I'd love it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So this is exactly why we do these design talks, to bring people together that are passionate about things and connect them to people who've been doing things so that they can move forward. I really loved hearing about all of your partnerships with AARP and working with Vision Zero and the Trust for Public Land. I liked you're talking about how streets are there to serve all people, not just motorists going through a place. And I think that really helps with that placemaking thing. And then also identifying and showing businesses who might be worried about parking going away, that you actually get more business, and the economic development drivers from these kind of activities on a street can be positive in the long run. But again, demonstrating that so that people aren't just going with what they think might happen and the fears that you referenced earlier. And then, as Debbie pointed out, the hiring local people and purchasing property in an area that people have gone on with these temporary projects and expanded them so much beyond just that temporary pop-up. My very first involvement with a Better Block type project was on Bluebonnet Circle, which is near my house. And that also led to funding from the city that redesigned that street to take it down from 2 lanes of continuous traffic and inappropriate yielding of some of the traffic, addition of crosswalks that made that a better place. It actually added parking, but that was very much needed for some of the businesses that had very limited parking.
Yeah.
So, but this is also very helpful to dispelling some of the concerns that people have. That question or that comment you made about basketball courts, that actually came up in a conversation about what was going to go into a park. And so I'm glad to hear that you've gathered some data on that. And I think we've had some installations here in Fort Worth that refute that as well.
Mhm.
I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any other questions. Is there anyone else that wants to unmute? I see Daniel.
Hi, yeah, this is Daniel Lial. I'm the Assistant Director of Development Services here in the city of Fort Worth, and I oversee the urban design team. So I feel like I need to say something about how the city, I mean, any permitting agency has been depicted. But I think we can play a role on connecting people as well, because we get a request from council members as well. Like, hey, what can we do in this area that is clearly decaying? So I think it could be a collaboration between the city, Better Blocks, and local neighborhood associations. So yeah, I think that's a great avenue to go, and I love that community design is willing to play that connecting role. I was going to say that change is possible, as many people have said during this chat. For example, another example when the city has been sensitive to those things is the pilot parklet streets patio program in the city of Fort Worth. It started during the pandemic. It started as a 6-month pilot, and now it's permanent. It's permanent policy. So yes, we just need to push everyone's boundary a little nicely and respectfully. But yes, I just wanted to point out, the city's openness to listen and try to accommodate those things.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you so
Sorry.
much. Yeah, I was just going to mention when we started, it's something I didn't talk about. We started out very, guerrilla and just kind of going out and doing things. Now our process is working very closely with city staff and kind of going through the process together. And what we're doing as we're working with city staff, we also have this community group that is becoming organized through this highly stressful, very fast project. But what happens in the end is you've got this quick win of this pilot demonstration. It was really fun event. Everybody kind of came together, and now city staff members and these community members are more closely connected and tend to work together as they go forward. In the best cases, there have been one or two cases where it was still a little strife and a little fighting between the two, but ultimately our goal is to kind of connect everyone so that you can go forward and make more effective and impactful changes. And we also realize, with city staff, like they're under-resourced and overworked as well, and so it is difficult when we come along and say, hey, we're going to do this thing in 120 days. And we're going to probably push your limits on permitting and the things that are allowed. But it's always fun to kind of work with people and kind of push through some of those obstacles together.
Yeah, I think I have had multiple roles that touch on all of these things. So as a community member, and then as someone who served on the zoning commission and then served on the city council, oftentimes people who go through a process that they find challenging and they have ideas that they could bring to the city that would make that process better, by the time they get done, they don't even want to go there anymore. And so and like you said, being an outsider, you can come in and say some of the things that maybe others are worried about. But I do want to back up what Daniel has said, that there are definitely city staff in Fort Worth who are looking to make these improvements and push forward these ideas themselves. So I think they are a very good partner. For an example, in Fort Worth of South Main Street, that was an undercover of darkness guerrilla thing that was done by folks that went out and restriped the street. And the city's first reaction was to be like, oh, we're going to have to remove this immediately, but then saw the better benefit of it all, and that ended up being a redesign and a infrastructure improvement to that corridor that has seen dividends for a long time. RJ Gibbs says, can you describe your initial community engagement outreach effort? Do you conduct visionary charrettes or consensus building forums? How is the final project design determined?
Yeah, so we start out with surveys, and the surveys are pretty broad. They ask, what do you like about your area? What do you not like? What are 3 words to describe your community? So we start with that, and then we layer that on top of what we know with the city plans that are already in place and what they've kind of mentioned. Any other surveys we can get our hands on. We also have our core team members that we're talking to, and then we put together the design and then start moving forward with that. For a lot of the pieces, like the art and, some of those different elements, we're working with the locals to bring all of that to life. So our team is really focused on the, nuts and bolts, the permitting, the insurance, all the boring stuff. But the community is really bringing the heart and soul with all the food and the fun and the entertainment. What we do is kind of once our design approach is set, we have a core team that's formed. And those people come from recommendations. They come through the survey process where we're like, who should we be inviting? Do you want to be a part of this? So we have a core team, and it's usually a couple block captains who are kind of our main folks that we're checking in with, sometimes daily. And then with that, we have folks who head up marketing, vendors, programming, materials, and I'm forgetting one other. But we all meet weekly. We have a checklist that we're going through, and we're like making sure everything's getting done. And then they're kind of doing their thing, and then we come back again. So it's community led. And that's been, at the core of this work since the beginning. We actually quit a project last year because we had an amazing community group that was working on the project, and the city council in this town, and it wasn't Dallas, it wasn't Fort Worth, it was somewhere else, but the city council started forming subcommittees, and everything had to go through them, and then they wanted to be the ones to select the vendors and all of those things. And we had this group of community members who were doing all this, and then they felt like everything was being taken away from them. So, we told them, if this is the course you want to continue down, then it's no longer a better block, because the community is no longer in charge and no longer leading it. And that's the course they wanted to continue. So we said, okay, then it's not a better block, and we'll let someone else kind of lead this charge. So it's, the one thing I don't think I fully realized when I started this work a few years ago was kind of this role that we would play. It's a weird role because you're getting really deep into community politics really fast. So it's kind of this therapist position where you're dealing with all the politics among community members and then with city staff, and then all of it kind of bringing together. So it's a fascinating role. I'm not saying we do it right all the time, but we do enjoy getting to work with folks.
So I have a question from Catherine. I have a question regarding the project with the basketball court taking up 40 spaces. Can you tell us a little bit more about the discussion that took place and any feedback you received from adjacent businesses regarding the reduction of the number of available parking spaces? Parking, that always comes up, no matter what you're doing. Parking is like the bane of my existence.
It is. So actually in that one, it's a bad example because the city purchased that property to turn it into a park. So those businesses were gone already or leaving at that point. So it's kind of a bad example because it's kind of cheating. Let's talk about, let's see, we recently did a project in East Point, Georgia, just last weekend. And in this one, so this was a weird street change one. So it was a two-way street, I believe 40 feet. And they had diagonal parking all across. And I don't remember the number. I'm going to say 18 spaces all across. Tons of parking everywhere in this area. But these 18 spaces were right in front of the restaurants, but plenty of parking everywhere. So what we did in this project is we actually took away a lane of traffic, which I would normally not do a two-way to a one-way conversion. I'm pretty against that in most cases. But because generally when you do that, you're making a one-way. When you have a one-way, there's no friction. There's no reason for a car to slow down. In this case, it was such a small stretch, and we created friction by moving the parking to parallel parking. And then we took that 16 feet that we had just gained back and we turned that into people spaces. So we had a parklet out there and we were able to do outdoor dining with the restaurants. And so in that one, so we ended up ultimately by changing the parking to the parallel, we took away about 8 spaces. And overall, the businesses were fine with it. And they had more business because we had a big event and there were a lot of people there. We did have people kind of asking about parking. And I think it was an opportunity to say, oh, there's parking here, there's parking over there. The MARTA station was just across the street, tons of parking over there. So yeah, parking comes up a lot and we have a lot of discussions around it as we're doing an event. And I had TikTok is a fascinating place to talk about all this work and to talk about these projects. And I had someone who was like, well, I was there and I absolutely hated it. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine. What about it did you not like? And he's like, well, you took away all the parking. And I was like, well, we didn't take away all the parking. We took away a couple spots. But did you enjoy the vendors who were out there? Did you enjoy sitting outside with your dinner? Did you experience anything else? Or, did you come into the space? And so it's all part of a conversation. And yes, parking is always one of the first questions that we get to talk about.
I don't see any other written questions, but
Okay,
anybody else?
And
Debbie?
well, I wanted to say parking. Yeah, parking is an issue, and our project on Ray Street is even more interesting because it's back in parking. So if you want to see a really interesting area with parking, but the next step, I personally think, and I've talked to people, is well, we go from parking and we want it to be pedestrian friendly. Let's talk about public transportation. And so that's where, and I know that's always the last thing people talk about it, but I have had bus stops move because they were in front of a business and taking parking spaces. I mean, there's things you need to do, and it's either it's parking, it's speed limit, it's a lot of things. But yeah, I think our next talk about transportation, it would be public transportation. I mean, talk at Ray Street is what we need to talk about because it's important. And walking, it's Texas, people don't walk that much, but we did have sidewalk issues. And I will say, we did partner with AARP and they did a walk study for us. We have to implement some of those things, but we're not there yet, but we're working on it. So maybe you can help us.
In for all of it.
Thank you.
So we have a
Are-
couple of pages of attendees, so I'm wanting to make sure that if there's anybody else on pages 2 and 3 who have questions, is there anyone else that hasn't had a chance to ask a question? Silence.
You can always feel free to email me as well. So it's just krista@betterblock.org.
And if there's anything that came up in this that anybody would like to see Community Design Fort Worth pursuing in future design talks, this I think opened up a lot of topics and conversations that are all very much aligned with our mission and AIA as well. So I am very, very pleased with this first design talk that we've done since I started working with Community Design Fort Worth, because I think it just hit all of the topics that I think we are going to be focusing on going forward. And I appreciate Krista's time today and her dedication to this work. We're definitely going to look to be partnering with you in the future and supporting your efforts throughout. I think I have one more thing popped up in the chat. It may just be a thank you. Yes, great presentation, lots of thank yous. So we appreciate it very much. And I think that is it, but please stay tuned to our social media and sign up on our website for our emails. If you're looking for additional design talks, we're looking to do these more regularly. There is also a mapping exercise on our website where you can highlight things in the city of Fort Worth that you think we're doing well, things that you would like us to do better, suggestions, and we gather ideas for design talks from that mapping exercise as well. So lots of opportunities to collaborate with us and work together for the betterment and improvements to our communities. So thank you so much, Krista, and thank you everybody for gathering with us today. And we look forward to future design talks going forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.